Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 219. Spooky season's over. It is birthday week, not only for the podcast, but for me as well, and oh boy, do we have loads of fun stuff to talk about this week. It's a celebration. We're going to start it off with a overview, a look back at the all-time classic British comedians Monty Python. We're going to go way back in the day. It is Restaurant Storytime Part 10. Oh no, I'm injured again. Some of the best injury stories of my cooking life. There's going to be a brand new top 5 to make me feel truly old as I share with you all things that I was alive for in the far-off decade of the 1970s. And there'll be a brand new This Week in History and Time capsule looking back at the creation of the Monopoly board game. All of that is coming up right now on the anniversary episode, the birthday episode, episode 219 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Oh yes, that sound there means it's birthday celebration time. The song isn't that long, so I can just let it play. Thank you all for tuning in to episode 219. It's going to be a big old celebration. It was 5 years ago to the day that episode 1 of the podcast launched. For those that might be new here, I got the idea for this podcast. It came from when I gave up alcohol. Within a few weeks of giving up booze, my brain started to clear, and I got this idea to do a podcast that included everything I like to talk about. We had a lot of Cape Cod and New England travel and history. There would be some fun road trip segments. There would be some lifestyle segments, foolish stories from my own life. And I would have a lot of Gen X nostalgia. Over the previous 200 plus episodes, you can see we have transitioned almost entirely to Gen X nostalgia because I realized that was really what I like to talk about. And there's a bigger audience for an all-encompassing Gen X nostalgia podcast than more of the niche that is Cape Cod. I know I've done this a few times before, but let's listen to the intro for me for my first podcast, as well as the outro. I don't think I've ever played that. So here's a little clip for you from episode 1 back on November 5th, 2020. Hello, world. Hoping that wherever you are, you're having a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, whatever you've got. This is the debut episode of the In My Footsteps podcast. I am thrilled that you could join me. My name is Christopher Setterland. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of an escape from the world. We're going to have a little bit of interesting history tidbits, New England travel, where to go, what to see when the time is right. A little bit of retro, going back in time, and some more interesting things as we go along. So that's all the time we have for this debut episode of the In My Footsteps podcast. I want to thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day to listen to me rant about things I enjoy and things you might enjoy. So thank you again for taking a walk in my footsteps. But remember, in life, create your own path. Thank you so much and take care, everyone. Yeah, I sounded way too serious, way too unsure of what exactly I wanted this podcast to be. But I've heard from many podcasters that have done hundreds of episodes. They say if you can't look back at your first few episodes and shake your head and wonder what you were doing, then you obviously haven't grown as a podcaster or a creator. So I definitely look back at them with a little bit of, cringe. Like I might end up redoing those first 4 or 5 episodes in the future. It'll be like the bands or singers that remaster old albums. Before I get too far into this podcast, I have to thank all of my Patreon subscribers the biggest backers, the ones that literally put their money where their mouth is to support me, my never-ending quest to be a full-time content creator, artist, whatever, with all the things I do. So thank you to Laurie, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, Dr. Shrimp, Porto, Chico. Thank you all for being my biggest backers. You too can get a shout out on the podcast episode. Go over and subscribe on Patreon for $5 a month. You get access to bonus podcast episodes, one of which went up just this past week. You get access to the remastered Without a Map live streams. See, I should remaster old podcast episodes. I'm remastering my old live streams. It just makes too much sense. Over there right now on Patreon is the full interview that I did with the cast and crew of Cape Cod Cthulhu, the movie that I made my acting debut in. We filmed it this past March. You can currently pre-order Blu-ray DVD copies. I believe that the movie will be available on streaming on Tubi starting the first of the year. That's when I'll share this interview for all to see on YouTube. But for the next few months, it's only on Patreon. So we've talked about the birthday of the podcast, but it is also my birthday week. It occurred just a few days ago. And as I was checking my email, it seems that I have an anonymous cameo that has been sent to me for my birthday. I figured rather than check it out, I would play it for the first time here on the podcast. So let's see who sent me birthday wishes.
Happy birthday, Chris. This is your old pal, Dr. Spatzel. I was paid $5 to say something nice about you. Well, for $5 I can say you don't look like a piece of moldy bread most of the time. Oh, and another thing. I got you a present. It is underneath all of the trash in the dumpster behind Taco Bell. If you can't find it, just keep digging in the trash until you do. Yay, happy birthday. Digital.
Boo, Dr. Spatzo. The joke never gets old. Or maybe it does. Sorry to everyone that groaned at that. People that are my age might get the joke, since Dr. Spatzo, the MS-DOS program, was from the early 90s. Anyone that's under 40 might be like, I don't get it. That's terrible AI voice. And it is. But wait, I promise there's a fun podcast, and I'll do a make good for that foolish cameo by telling you a story, an infamous story from an old birthday of mine. So come back with me, if you will, to the year 1988. I am turning 11 years old. This story is 1,000% true. I could not make this up. I had several friends over for this birthday. A few of them I had known for several years. One was a newer kid to my school. There's pictures. I was opening all of my presents. I had a lot of envelopes that had cash in it from family because I was of that age where just give them cash, they'll get what they want. So my party's over. Everyone has left. And it is at that point that I realized that all of that cash that I had gotten from my birthday was missing. We searched high and low in my bedroom, everywhere, where I could have put it. My mother started to put two and two together. There was one outlier at this party, someone that was newer to my friend group. I didn't want to believe it, but my mother called over to this person's house. His parents weren't home, but his brother answered the phone. And of course, they denied taking the money. My mother said, "We're going to be over at your house within the next however many minutes." She said, "You better have that money when I get to the front door." We went over there. My mother went up to this kid's front door, knocked on his door. He opened the door and handed my mother all of my birthday money. That's right. My quote-unquote friend stole all of my birthday money and at first denied it until my mother said she was going to get the police involved. I believe it was around $100, which, it's a good amount of money for an 11-year-old. And when adjusted for inflation, it's closer to $270. I didn't really hang out with that kid ever again, because why would you want to hang out with a kid that stole your birthday money? I mean, what a friggin' scumbag kid. And even though he was a scumbag, I haven't seen him in so long, but I'm still not going to name names. Although those of you out there that know me in reality, if you want to ask, I will tell you. Anyway, there we go. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to the podcast. There's a lot of stuff to intro this show. Now, the irony here as we kick off the podcast is Monty Python, I got introduced to them through the same kid that stole my birthday money. But I won't let that bitterness get in the way of this next segment. So let's start the celebration off as we look at the legendary comedy group Monty Python coming up right now. This is another one of those segments on the podcast that I can't believe it took me until episode 219 to actually talk about Monty Python. They were such a huge influence on me in my childhood, even though they predated my childhood, my birth, by several years. The older I get, and the more I look back at not just Monty Python, but my humor, especially things that I did with my camcorder in high school, the more I can see their influence on my sense of humor, the absurdity of some of the things I would come up with. I am sure a lot of you out there know the name Monty Python because it's just such an odd name, even if you don't know what their claims to fame are as far as comedy goes. But there are a few comedy groups that have reshaped the landscape of humor like Monty Python. They originated in the late 1960s with 6 writer-performers: Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Terry Gilliam, Eric Idle, Terry Jones, and Michael Palin. These men created a surreal, subversive, and intellectual style of comedy that influenced generations. Absurd television sketches, satirical films, and stage performances. The whole idea with the intellectual style of comedy comes right from their origins, where it began at Oxford and Cambridge, 2 of Britain's most prestigious universities. Members of what would become Monty Python honed their comedic craft through student review groups: John Cleese and Graham Chapman at Cambridge, Terry Jones and Michael Palin at Oxford. These institutions were breeding grounds for sketch comedy. By the mid-60s, several future Pythons were already working in British television. Cleese and Chapman wrote for The Frost Report, while Jones and Palin worked on Do Not Adjust Your Set, which also featured American animator Terry Gilliam, whose cutout animation style became a Monty Python hallmark. I always found those weird, those animation ones. There'd be a lot of weird things on conveyor belts. There'd be like some random foot stepping on things. In 1969, the BBC took a chance on a new sketch show from this collection of writers and performers. The result was Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Monty Python, the Flying Circus.
That music there is classic. Like, that's one of those, even if you don't know the song, it's going to sound familiar to you. Like, where do I know that from? So, The Flying Circus premiered on October 5th, 1969 on BBC One. The show broke nearly every convention of traditional sketch comedy. Instead of neat punchlines, the sketches often ended abruptly, or they morphed into others through Gilliam's surreal animations, or dissolved into complete nonsense. I'll admit, when I first saw Monty Python Flying Circus, or any of their movies, The Holy Grail or Life of Brian, I was 11 years old, 12 years old, so a lot of the absurdity, social satire, wordplay, philosophical commentary, it went over my head. It would take me several rewatches before things would start to make sense, the stuff that was more intellectual. Classic sketches like The Dead Parrot or The Ministry of Silly Walks, the Lumberjack song, the Argument Clinic. These all made sense right away. A lot of the stuff with physical comedy or props, like the Dead Parrot is one of their all-time greatest sketches, where a man goes back into a pet shop with the bird cage saying, "You sold me a dead parrot." And the guy's trying to say it's just sleeping. So the other man just takes the parrot, he's screaming at it and banging it on the counter, saying that it's dead. Monty Python's Flying Circus ran for 4 seasons and 45 episodes, ending in 1974. And by that point, Monty Python had become a cultural phenomenon in the UK, and soon thanks to PBS broadcasts in the United States as well. If you've never seen an episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus, the good news is it is available for free on Tubi. You can go on there and stream all their episodes. I named some classic skits there, but there are other ones that your taste in humor might differ from mine, so don't go into it just looking at the ones I mentioned. Once the Flying Circus ended, Monty Python began to transition into film. They had actually first done it in 1971 while the show was on the air. They did a film that was called And Now for Something Completely Different, which was one of their non sequiturs or connectors to different sketches. And this film was basically just a compilation of their best sketches, refilmed for international audiences. Their first true cinematic breakthrough was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is from 1975. If you haven't seen this, I highly, highly recommend it. It's a take on the legend of King Arthur, and I'm not going to gloss over it, but just so you know, this is not going to be a one and done with Monty Python. So there will be segments in the future where I do deeper dives into these films and such, because there's no way I can do justice to any of their films or even the TV show in a segment on one podcast. There are so many classic moments in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but the one that stands out to me, that is probably off the beaten path for a lot of people that know the film, is there's a scene in the movie where it cuts from being back in medieval times, and it suddenly jumps to modern day, and there's a historian talking about the legend of King Arthur. And then out of nowhere, this knight on a horse comes by with a sword and just like slashes this guy's neck, and he goes down. And so you'll go back to the regular movie, but every now and then it'll cut back to that scene where the guy is like being covered with a body bag and there's police there. You have to see it because it's funnier than I'm making it out to be. The reason I bring that up is when I was filming with my camcorder, my friends Barry and John and I, we did a skit that was based a little bit on the Holy Grail. We have Barry, he's running towards the camera, and every time we cut back, he's further away. It's from the Holy Grail. And then finally, Barry's talking to the camera about making sure little children don't see the next scene because it's going to be bloody. And then suddenly our friend John dives in and just kills Barry, and he's stabbing him and making these noises. Here, you can hear it for yourself.
Excuse me folks, but this next clip is a little bloody, so you might want to gather any small children and get them out of the house.
Oh, God! Oh, God! Oh!
Yes, it doesn't work without the visuals, but that's from our actual camcorder. It's probably from the spring of 1996. From there, probably their most famous or most well-received film was Monty Python's Life of Brian in 1979, and it's a religious satire about a man born on the same day as Jesus who is mistaken for Jesus. It was banned in several countries, but it's also hailed as one of the greatest comedies ever made. Their final film as a full team was Monty Python's The Meaning of Life from 1983. My introduction to Monty Python through that idiot kid that stole my birthday money was Monty Python Live at the Hollywood Bowl, which is from 1982. This is a live version of all of their classic sketches. It was basically a crash course in everything you needed to know about Monty Python. I immediately loved it and found myself at the local video store renting compilations of The Flying Circus, renting The Holy Grail, renting Life of Brian. After being together as a group for over 15 years, after the Meaning of Life movie came out, the members of Monty Python pursued solo careers. John Cleese would create and star in Fawlty Towers, which is often cited as one of the greatest sitcoms ever made. He was also in movies like A Fish Called Wanda and Rat Race, which is a highly underrated comedy from 2001. Eric Idle is somebody that has shown up in so many movies. All you have to do is see him in National Lampoon's European Vacation as the person that the Griswolds seem to always hit with their car or he gets hurt. He also created another mockumentary, The Ruddles, which was a takeoff on the Beatles, a band that was supposed to be just like them. That's another one that's underrated. Terry Gilliam became a celebrated director with works like The Fisher King in 1991 and 12 Monkeys in 1995. Michael Palin became a beloved travel documentarian, hosting series like Around the World in 80 Days. Terry Jones, also a scholar of medieval literature, directed or co-directed most of the Monty Python films. He sadly passed away in 2020 after battling dementia. Graham Chapman was the man who often played the authority figures and the straight men in the skits. He died in 1989 from cancer. But even in death, Monty Python made it into not a skit, but John Cleese gave a crazy eulogy at his funeral. They did this interview with the whole group maybe a year after he had died, and it was all the other 5 members of Monty Python and then an urn on one of the chairs, and they would ask it questions. In 2014, Monty Python staged a series of farewell shows at London's O2 Arena called Monty Python Live Mostly. They have influenced everything that came after the dawn of the flying circus. Saturday Night Live, Kids in the Hall, South Park, The Simpsons. What made Monty Python so revolutionary wasn't just their jokes, it was the freedom. They dismantled the structure of sketch comedy and turned it into a playground for their wacky ideas. They could be intellectual in one sketch and juvenile in the next. More than 50 years after the Flying Circus first aired, the name Monty Python still evokes not just laughter but admiration. They were pioneers that redefined comedy. I've already mentioned how they influenced me and things I did with my camcorder. There was literally nothing off limits for them. No topic, no authority, no convention that they didn't mock. So cheers to Monty Python. And like I said, in the future on the podcast, there will be more segments. Best sketches on the Flying Circus, deeper reviews of Holy Grail, Life of Brian. So those of you that love Monty Python, don't worry, it's coming back. This week in history, we are going back 90 years to November 5th, 1935, and the official launch of the board game Monopoly. The timing of this worked out well because as I'm recording the podcast, the classic Monopoly game at McDonald's is going on again, so it's probably in your subconscious. But even if it wasn't, there are a few games in history that have captured the imagination and the competitive spirit of players quite like Monopoly. Colorful properties, iconic tokens, infamous bankruptcies, go to jail. So in transparency, the true origin of Monopoly dates back to the early 20th century, when a woman named Elizabeth Maggie, who was a writer, inventor, and social activist, designed a board game called the Landlord's Game in 1903. Maggie was a follower of economist Henry George, who proposed a single tax system meant to discourage land monopolies. Her goal was educational, demonstrate how unchecked greed and land ownership could lead to economic inequality. Maggie's Landlord Game featured a square board with properties, railroads, utilities, and a corner labeled Go to Jail. Players could buy and sell land, collect rent, and experience 2 sets of rules. One prosperity version, where everyone benefited when wealth was created, and another monopolist version, where one player tried to crush the others financially. Maggie patented the game in 1904, and later again in 1924, selling homemade versions and licensing it to educational publishers. As the Landlord's Game circulated informally, players began modifying it. Homemade versions appeared, changing the name of the game to things like Finance, Auction, and eventually Monopoly. It was these informal versions of the game and the popularity in communities in Pennsylvania and Atlantic City, New Jersey where locals adapted the board to include Atlantic City street names like Boardwalk, Park Place, Ventnor Avenue, Baltic Avenue. These homemade versions lacked any formal patent protection. This allowed the game to spread organically, and it was within this community tradition that a man named Charles Darrow encountered the game. Darrow was an unemployed heating engineer from Germantown, Pennsylvania, and he learned about the homemade Atlantic City version from friends. Seeing its potential, Darrow made his own refinements. He added colorful, printed property cards, distinctive metal tokens, which were inspired by his niece's charm bracelet, and hand-drawn boards that he sold to local department stores. In 1934, Darrow pitched Monopoly to Parker Brothers, one of America's leading toy and game companies, and initially the company rejected it for being too complex. However, when Darrow's independently sold versions proved so popular, Parker Brothers reconsidered and bought the rights in 1935. Initially, the game was marketed with Darrow as the sole inventor. The company paid him royalties that made him a millionaire. Monopoly became one of the best-selling games of the Depression era. However, Parker Brothers quickly learned of Elizabeth Maggie's earlier patent. To secure complete control over the game, they purchased her patent for $500, or a shade under $12,000 when adjusted for inflation to 2025. Now, it's hard to find exact numbers on how much money Charles Darrow made from Monopoly. It is said he made millions, so let's just say we'll go on the low side, $2 million. Even that would be over $47 million when adjusted for inflation. So that's on the very, very low end compared to what Elizabeth Maggie made. Eventually, Darrow sold the rights to Monopoly to Parker Brothers, and the rest is history. Since its commercial release in 1935, more than 1 billion people have played Monopoly. It's a mix of luck, strategy, and ruthless competition. I'm sure a lot of you listening played Monopoly as kids and were trying so hard to bankrupt your parents, just like we kids did in real life. Take all their money in Monopoly and then go eat all the food in the fridge. And that game, Monopoly, one of the most famous games in the history of the world, was officially launched 90 years ago this week in history. Oh, and it's time for a very special time capsule. For this one, we're going back 48 years ago this week. Oh my God. November 2nd, 1977. Some guy was born in a small hospital on Cape Cod. He then became a podcaster. Everything in between is murky. But what else was going on in the world of pop culture on that day? Well, let's find out. The number one song was You Light Up My Life by Debbie Boone. This was off of her album of the same name, You Light Up My Life, and won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Debbie Boone is the daughter of singer Pat Boone, and this song spent 10 weeks at number one. It was the biggest hit of the 1970s, at least in terms of chart performance, and set a new record for longest tenure at number one, breaking Elvis Presley's record he set with the double A-side Don't Be Cruel and Hound Dog. The number one movie was Julia, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing $2.23. This is an Oscar-winning political drama starring Jane Fonda. It's based on a chapter from Lillian Hellman's 1973 book, Pentimento, about the author's relationship with a lifelong friend, Julia, who fought against the Nazis in the years leading up to World War II. It was a modest hit, making about $21 million on a budget of $8 million. It was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, winning 3, including Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Original Screenplay. The number one TV show was Laverne and Shirley. This is the classic sitcom starring Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams as Laverne and Shirley, roommates who worked together at the Schatz Brewery in Milwaukee. The series was a spin-off of Happy Days, lasting 8 seasons from 1976 to 1983, and a total of 178 episodes. And if you were around back then, November 2nd, 1977, maybe you had just had your first child. He was pretty cool, but still a crying child is something you want to get away from every now and then. Maybe you bring this baby to his grandparents' house, whether it was Nana, whether it was Nina and Grandpa, and you get to go out for dinner. Well, I've got a great deal for you, the Howard Johnson's meal deals. You can get the fish fry if you're out on a Wednesday and Friday for $1.99, or all-you-can-eat chicken for $1.99 on Mondays. There's loads of other deals. Chili dogs, meatball and cheese sandwiches, breakfast stuff like Western omelets, French toast, hamburgers and mac and cheese. So there you go. All that fun stuff at Howard Johnson's. You can go for Monday, Wednesday, Friday meal deals. Just don't forget to pick up baby food at Angelo's on the way home. But that'll wrap up the time capsule. That'll wrap up this week in history. So I've told you what was going on in pop culture the day I was born, way, way back. Well, let's continue to make me feel bad about my age as we look at the top 5 things that I was alive for in the 1970s. I will try to edit out my tears as we start it off now. Well, I think this segment may be one that I need a little drink. Energy drink, don't worry. Here on the top 5, we are going to look at the top 5 things that I was alive for in the 1970s. So by the time this podcast goes live, I will have had my birthday. I will have turned 48 years old. We're getting close to half a century. So obviously a lot of events have happened in my lifetime, and a lot of them I remember. I will say none of these things from the 70s I remember. I'm just saying I was alive for them. What I did here is I did a lot of research. I started on my birth date and went to New Year's Eve 1979 and just started looking up major events that had happened, historical events, to kind of just show how quickly time goes. Because in my mind, the 80s are still 25 years ago. But no, the 80s ended 36 years ago. As you know, with most of these top 5s, they are in no particular order, and I have some honorable mentions. This was a list that I had a lot of things I had to cut off of it. I could have probably had a top 10 and honorable mentions, but we can't change the formula now. So what I'll do for the honorable mentions, I will kind of fly through them so we can spend a little more time on the actual top 5. So, honorable mentions for things that I was alive for in the 1970s include John Paul II becoming Pope. This happened on October 16th, 1978. He was Pope until his death in 2005. Another honorable mention is the first test tube baby. Louise Joy Brown was born July 25th, 1978. Another honorable mention is the death of Charlie Chaplin. The silent film star died on December 25th, 1977. Sadly, I just missed the cut with legendary Three Stooges performer Mo Howard, who died 2 years before I was born in 1975. Another honorable mention is the assassination of Harvey Milk. The first openly gay politician to be elected in California was murdered November 27th, 1978. And the final honorable mention is the beginning of the Iran hostage crisis, where 66 Americans were taken hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran. And this began on November 4th, 1979. So those are the honorable mentions. These things I was alive for. I was a newborn. I was a toddler. I have no memories of any of those things happening. Before we get in the top 5, I will say my first memories that I can still kind of envision begin in probably later 1980, and they include the release of John Lennon's final album, Double Fantasy. I have a lot of memories of my father, my uncle, playing that album. But as I get older, those memories get more and more fuzzy. Well, let's get into the actual top 5. Let's start with number 1, the debut of McDonald's Happy Meal. This was officially launched nationwide in June 1979. It is the classic kids meal, the foldable cardboard kind of house with the little M that's the handles on it. Brightly colored, decorated, usually with some kind of a toy inside. The concept for the Happy Meal was developed by Bob Bernstein and his advertising agency, Bernstein Rain Advertising. That first Happy Meal was a circus wagon themed box, and it contained a burger, fries, a drink, and one of 6 toys. These toys were nothing exciting. We're talking things like a wallet, stencils, a spinning top, a quote-unquote fun ruler. And from there, today, McDonald's sells more than 1 billion Happy Meals every year, or about 2.7 million every day. And if you were wondering, and I definitely was, that equals 31 Happy Meals per second. Number 2 is the Blizzard of '78. Oh, my Cape Cod and New England listeners, you know it all too well. This occurred on February 6th and 7th, 1978, a massive snowstorm slamming into New England. Boston received 27 inches of snow. Some places received more than 40 inches of snow. This is the storm for Cape Codders, longtime Cape Codders, the storm that destroyed Coast Guard Beach in Eastham, including sweeping Henry Beston's iconic faux castle, the outermost house, out into the ocean. Me, not only was I alive during this, I was out in it stranded. My mother has told this story about us being on Route 151 in the Mashpee area on Cape Cod and having trouble getting our car, which I think was a Volkswagen Beetle, up and over a hill because the roads were so slick and people were having to stop, push a car up the top of the hill to get them free, and then going back to help the next person. So yes, I was 4 months old. I was in the Blizzard of '78, which I'm sure that must have been fun for people that had to actually drive in it. Number 3 is the iconic NCAA men's basketball championship game between Magic Johnson's Michigan State and Larry Bird's Indiana State. This game occurred on March 26th, 1979. It was the kind of the dawning of the Bird and Magic rivalry that would basically go on to save the NBA when they both were drafted. Michigan State defeated Indiana State 75-64, with Magic scoring 24 points, Larry Bird scoring 19, and having a difficult time with Michigan State's defense. So Larry Bird was actually already drafted by the Boston Celtics. He chose to go back to school for 1 more year, and then after this game, Magic Johnson was drafted by the Lakers, and in total, they would play 37 games against each other in the NBA, with Magic winning 22. If you want to get more info about the Celtics-Lakers rivalry in the 1980s, I did a whole segment on it back in episode 199. Number 4 is the first attack by the Unabomber. This occurred on May 25th, 1978, with serial bomber Ted Kaczynski sending his first package to Northwestern University. It was addressed to Professor Buckley Christ, but was actually opened by a campus police officer, Terry Marker, who was injured but thankfully not killed. In total, Kaczynski would send numerous bombs over a reign of terror that lasted from 1978 to 1995. He killed 3 people and injured 23 before finally being captured. In 1996, he was captured in a remote cabin in rural Montana. Interestingly, the Unabomber cabin was dismantled and reassembled at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and it's on display as part of a public exhibit called the FBI Experience. And finally, number 5 on the list of top 5 things that I was alive for in the 1970s. It's a twofer. the arrests of serial killers Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, because I had to include both of these sickos. Ted Bundy was arrested on February 15th, 1978 in Pensacola, Florida on suspicions of driving a stolen vehicle. Bundy kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of young girls between 1974 and 78, ultimately being sentenced to death and being executed in 1989. John Wayne Gacy was arrested on December 21st, 1978, due to suspicions after the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Peast. Gacy murdered at least 33 young boys between 1972 and 78 in a suburb of Chicago, burying them mostly in the crawl space under his house. He was found guilty and sentenced to death, with his execution occurring on May 10th, 1994. So there you have it. The top 5 things that I was alive for in the 1970s. It's wild to think about and go back and look at these types of things, because they're parts of history class now. Do any of you do that? I would think most of you would have to be my age or older, where you look back and just realize how many things you have seen, experienced, or at least been alive for. And you younger listeners, it'll happen to you too. But we go from me feeling bad about getting older to some laughter as we pay a visit, possibly a last visit, to Restaurant Storytime. So let's run down my most gruesome injuries. You might want to put your lunch away if you are eating right now, but you'll be the judge. Well, here we are again. Restaurant Storytime. This is the 10th installment of Restaurant Storytime. Restaurant Storytime 10. Oh no, I've been injured again. For those of you that are new here that might not know about the Restaurant Storytime segments, they are my look back at my many, many years in the restaurant industry. I began in restaurants in 1993. I bounced in and out before finally leaving for the last time in 2021. And yes, it's true, I have done 9 other segments sharing the different experiences I had. We may end up doing another segment in the future, but as of right now, I would have to really sit and think about what stone I haven't turned over yet as far as sharing experiences, because this here, it's kind of a compilation of all of my worst injuries that I suffered while cooking. Those of you out there that have worked in the restaurant industry, and everyone should have to understand about what's important in life when you get people that complain about not getting ranch dressing or ketchup or something. But those of you that have worked in the industry, you may have worse injuries than I've got. I did not lose a finger or an arm or an eye. Although when looking back, I probably should have lost something like that based on some of the stupidity that I did. Luckily for me, I guess, I could only come up with 8 different stories. And that's not bad considering I was in the restaurant industry for 1,000 years. Honorable mentions for worst injuries include having to work the day after I ran my first and only marathon, trying to stand up with every muscle wrecked in my legs, including an Achilles tendon injury that took 5 months to heal. That was fun. And the other honorable mention is nearly dying from the fumes of bleach with all of the windows and doors closed in the prep room. That was actually Restaurant Storytime 5, Lucky to Be Alive, I called it. That was in episode 97, if you want the full story of that, nearly dying from the bleach fumes. Okay, so these are not in chronological order, although ironically it will start with my very first day ever in the restaurant industry. I was brought in to work at a restaurant Memorial Day weekend, 1993, so I was 15 years old. At this restaurant, the Marshside restaurant, some of you Cape Codders may know, at the original building, we had a restaurant, we had a gravel parking lot, and across the parking lot, we had a giant barn. Half of it was our prep area, fridge, walk-in fridge, freezer. The other half People stored cars. We had our dry storage. They wanted me to start as a prep boy. So they sent me across the parking lot to the prep room. My first day, my first probably 10 minutes there, I walked over. My very first job was to slice tomatoes. I had never handled a chef's knife. I had never been shown how to use a chef's knife. I had used butter knives and maybe steak knives. So I grabbed this Michael Myers machete and immediately proceed to slice my thumb. The first thing I did, instead of cutting tomatoes, I cut my thumb. It was a good one. I had to grab the brown paper towels, wrap my bloody thumb, and then go back over to the kitchen in disgrace. Say, sorry you thought I could do this job, but look, I can't. I was then put on dishwasher duty for probably the next year. That was my probation period. This next one I had totally forgotten about until a few months ago a Facebook memory popped up. When they rebuilt the Marshside into a more modern, I guess, I would say sterile restaurant with no character, we had this monstrous coffee maker. It was like super deluxe. You could get cappuccinos, espressos, different flavors of coffee. So I would sometimes do 3-4 shots of espresso, chug them down, and then be like a super ball all through the kitchen. One day, this was probably 2011, there was an issue with the coffee maker. So me being a genius, thinking, anytime anything electronic has an issue, you just unplug it and plug it back in. The problem was, like I said, the coffee maker was big, it was close to the wall, I couldn't move everything out, or I didn't care to try. So instead I slid my hand back along the wall till I got to this big, monstrous plug, and I started wiggling it, trying to get it free, and I slid my fingers behind the plug. It was still plugged in, and I got in between the prongs and promptly got shocked. And it was a good one, too. I kind of bounced backwards a few steps. Everyone was looking at me. I said, I just got electrocuted here. And this was after I had many years in the business, and yet I still didn't think I shouldn't probably do this. I might as well have just, stuck a fork in it back there. Next up, this is one of my most infamous ones. One of those, again, what was I thinking ideas. I think this was 1996. I had to make tuna salad. So we had these big cans of tuna, not the little tiny ones that are, an inch tall. No, these cans of tuna were probably 20 times that size. And so I had to use our industrial can opener. So I didn't end up going all the way around with the can opener because I didn't want the lid to fall in the tuna juice because I'd have to fish it out of there. So I left probably 3/4 of an inch of can that I hadn't cut through. So rather than going and grabbing something like a oyster shucker or a knife to kind of pry the lid up so that I could then bend it back, I just stuck my finger in and started pulling at the lid to pull it up. I think some of you know where this is going. Instead of pulling the tuna lid up, I ended up running my finger down the tuna lid, slicing my middle finger like a flap. I'm looking at the wound right now. I've got this massive scar on my middle finger, so it's fun to show people. But oh boy, this was a gusher. I ended up having to get, I don't think I got stitches. I think it was maybe stripped closed, because I ended up having to go to the medical center. This was another of those wounds where it's like trying to explain what you did without sounding like a complete idiot is impossible. Because everyone was like, why didn't you cut the lid all the way off? Or why didn't you pry the lid out with something other than your finger? Yay. That's a good one right there. I remember that being the first time that I actually hung out with my friend Megan. She was one of the servers out front, and she got tasked with driving my foolish idiot self to the medical center. That was like the first time we hung out outside of work, was me getting my middle finger bandaged up. Next up is one that could probably happen to anyone. At most restaurants in the prep room, you've got these box graters that you use to grate cheese, carrots, whatever else you want to grate. I was grating fresh Parmesan cheese, the ones that come in the giant wheel with the rind on it. And to grate this cheese, you need it to be small, like flakes, so that people can sprinkle it on pasta. So I had to use the smaller side part of the grater. And you don't want to waste any of this cheese because it's fresh, it's expensive. So I'm there holding this little triangle of cheese, grating it down the side, and trying to not waste it. And as I got closer to the rind, it was starting to get stuck. So you had to put a little more force behind it to grate it. You might know where this is going too. The cheese got stuck. My thumb did not. I ended up grating it right down the cheese grater. This was on my thumb. Another one. I'm looking at the wound now like a fool. The problem here, if you injure yourself on a finger, on a knuckle, your fingers have to bend, especially your thumb. And if you're working in a restaurant, I couldn't have like a splint on my hand. This wound took months to heal because I would have it bandaged tight and then I would forget and I would grab something and it would just open up and I'd look and be bleeding again after months. I think at some points I just got so sick of it that I would just let it bleed through. I would just wear like 5 gloves on one hand and say, hell with it. I think this next one is the most recent one, and it's not that recent. It's probably 2013. This was right around Christmas time. This was the gift to myself. We were closing up early, I remember, and we were cleaning up because we had our company Christmas party. So we were finishing up, cleaning the kitchen, then we were going to all go home, get ready, and then go meet at this country club. So I'm cleaning the flat top, and I put some degreaser on it, these chemicals. And so then, you put the degreaser on. There's kind of a plastic handle with a green scrubber, and you can put these little griddle screens under there to help clean out any grease. Could you hear that? As I was describing the griddle screens, I was rubbing my hand, like trying to show you what it is, even though you can't see it. Anyway, I'm scrubbing the grill. I was cleaning all this grease and these chemicals. I ended up going a little too hard and I splashed the chemicals off the back of the grill. They ended up splashing me right in the face, missing my eye by about half an inch. And I'll never forget, one of the other cooks, his name is Tim. Shout out to Tim if he's out there. Excellent chef and a good man too. But anyway, I had splashed in the face and he's looking at me because first thing I did was reach up to wipe my face. And I wiped the skin off, which was probably the size of maybe a pen cap, like a little circle like that. But I'll never forget Tim's face after I wiped my face. He just looked and then shook his head and hung his head like, oh boy, what did you do? Right before the Christmas party? Let me just burn my face off like I'm Harvey Dent. This next one here, this is the 6th one on my list. I guess we've got the dedication to the craft I call with getting the photo no matter what. This might be dedication to the craft with cooking, but injuring myself. This was probably 2002. I know it was a Sunday morning because that was when I usually worked breakfast. Shout out to Maui and Dana. We were the masters of Sunday morning. So we would have poached eggs. You have them in the water, a little bit of vinegar so they don't stick to the bottom. And when the poached eggs are ready, you scoop them out with a slotted spoon. Typically, we would have what we called monkey dishes, clear glass dishes to put the poached eggs in. And on a day like Sunday, it'd be so busy that there's very little time to slow down and check your work. I just remember it being so busy, I scooped a poached egg out, and instead of putting it in the glass dish, I put it right on top of my hand. Probably my index finger, and rather than throw everything down and throw the egg, I turned and I put the glass down because I didn't want to break it. I did throw the egg away. I did not serve someone poached egg with my seared skin on it. But the problem was sitting that boiling hot egg on your finger for what probably was 10 seconds or more. It caused my skin to bubble up so much. It was like my index finger from the first knuckle down to my hand and then a little bit more. It was all swollen like a frickin' balloon. But we can't stop and we can't get medical attention. I grabbed a clear 6th pan, filled it with water and ice, and stuck my left hand in that and continued working with one hand, mostly reading slips, but then also taking my hand out, drying it with a towel, and doing anything I needed to do. Dedication to the craft as I sear my hand. Boy. This next one, this is one of the most painful ones. So when we reopened the marsh side, when the new one was built, we had to, all of us kitchen crew, go in a few days early and start prepping because we knew it would be busy. We were opening in the summer. I got tasked with making coconut shrimp. Not cooking it, but slicing all the shrimp, creating all the beer batter, getting the flour coconut, rolling them, bagging them. I spent 8 straight hours making coconut shrimp. No wonder why I hate them now. So by the end of the shift, I was just punch drunk with coconut shrimp. I had filled this monstrous Lexan. It's a big rectangle plastic container. Anyway, the one I had was 5 gallons filled with bags of coconut shrimp. I was trying to put it on a rolling rack. And those of you that know the restaurants, the rolling racks, they have places for shelves for sheet pans. But in the middle, there's a metal bar. The only way I could get this Lexan in there was slide it, and then I was going to put it down so that it would rest on that metal bar. The problem was that it slipped, and it ended up pancaking my finger between the Lexan filled with cocoa shrimp and that metal bar. This is the one I cannot believe I didn't break my finger, but it was just a mass of blood and then bruise. The best part of this story is that was my very last thing I had to do in the whole shift. So we all had a celebratory beer and we were cheersing to the day. And I'm holding mine up with this bloody hand that's shaking in pain. And the rest of them are like, yay, we did it. And I'm just like, oh God, I'm dying here. Don't worry, I didn't bleed into any of the cocoa shrimp. I was wearing gloves. Last but not least, for Restaurant Storytime 10, this is way more on the lighter side, but I had to share it because it's just so funny. There was one time that I showed up to work so hungover, so they put me on the salad station. I guess that was like their sympathy for me. But the fluorescent lights inside the kitchen were so bright that I went to my car and I grabbed my sunglasses. So I'm in there making salads, wearing sunglasses like I'm some kind of Hollywood star. And I'll never forget Maui, who was the chef and also like my second father. He taught me so much about cooking, but also life. But the thing is, he was a recovering alcoholic, so he had no sympathy for me being hungover. So he yelled at me, take those effing sunglasses off. It's not my fault you're hungover. Now, he did let me have ibuprofen, but I had to work with the bright lights in my eyes. That was the only time I ever showed up to work hungover. I remember another guy showed up to work hungover, and Maui banged the pots behind his head. I know this makes Maui sound like he's bad, but he's one of the best people I ever met, so that's why I laugh at it. But there you have it. Restaurant Storytime 10. Oh no, I'm injured again. 8 stories of my worst injuries. I hope they weren't too gory. I'm sure a lot of you that worked in restaurants have had worse injuries, but those were mine. Someday in the future, probably next year, I will do a mixtape episode that will be all 10 restaurant story times. Man, that's going to be a long episode, but it'll all be worth it. So I hope you've enjoyed these. Like I said, there may be a time in the future that I figure out what an 11th segment could be. But right now, 10 seems to be a good way to stop. So there you have it. But until next week, that'll wrap up episode 219 of the In My Footsteps podcast. My birthday episode, the podcast birthday episode, the first episode of November. One of the longest episodes, clocking in at well over an hour. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed your weekly dose of Gen X nostalgia, with this week being sprinkled in with some sadness about me getting older and some embarrassing injuries in the restaurant stories. As I always say, you can become a Patreon subscriber for $5 a month. If donating money isn't feasible, the best thing you can do is share my content. And believe me, I got a lot of it. Podcast episodes, YouTube videos, blogs, 10 books. I have so much stuff that I'm constantly putting out there that I do find it hard to promote all of it properly. I'm currently in the beginning stages, along with my oldest friend Barry, who you heard getting killed in that clip from high school in the Monty Python segment. I'm in the process with him of revising my homepage, ChristopherSetterland.com. He's going to help me create this new, more modern version of the page. Then he's going to hand it off to me. He's like my training wheels. Then I'll be able to update it with all of my stuff. That will likely be coming up the first of the year next year, so nothing imminent. What is imminent is next week in episode 220. We're going to go back 20 years and look at the launch of YouTube, including the first videos ever uploaded to that platform. We're going to go back and look 30 years ago at the release of the original Beatles anthology. It'll give me a chance to talk about the Beatles. And we're going to have a new top 5 that's going to be a little something different. This is going to be the top 5 products that peaked in the 1980s but are still around. What I was thinking of is things that I saw in a lot of commercials back then, and these products are still going today, but you just don't see them advertised anywhere. For example, one spoiler, something like Bufferin, the pain reliever medication. Those were in ads all the time in the 1980s, Bufferin. And you don't see it advertised anywhere, but it's still in stores. So that's kind of the gist of it. That's all coming up next week on episode 220 of the In My Footsteps podcast. So I have some news to share. I had mentioned at the end of last week's show that I might have something to share, so I can give you a little bit of an update of something major that's going on. An old story that I wrote, an old ebook, The Cabin, has now been optioned for a feature film. I can't give away too much, just that we've got the locations pretty much all set. I've got the budget in mind. It's going to be low budget. I am not suddenly getting millions for this, although you never know, but someday. But we'll be filming sometime next summer with a hopeful release date sometime in 2027. So we just add that to my plate. I will be executive producer of this film. I'll share more when I can. Right now, it's still in the beginning stages. Obviously, it's many months until we even film. But yes, a feature film based on something that I wrote. I mean, that's a huge deal. I'm so excited. You can keep up on all of my stuff that's going on. Follow me on social media. Facebook fan page for the podcast, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, my YouTube channel, my blogs. I do the Initial Impressions 2.0 blog weekly. Happy birthday this week to my former Prep Boys partner. He was there for a lot of those Restaurant Storytime issues, Liam. Luckily, we got to reconnect this summer. I hadn't seen him in over 20 years. I got to confirm to his wife that all of the wacky stories that he has told about our times at the Marshside were all true. So I hope you have an excellent birthday. Make me some slaw, cut some slarettos, go punch a box of fries. All right, I've kept you all long enough here to celebrate birthday week for the podcast and me. Thank you all again so much. Remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, but you already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.